Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of his time, a wise strategist and a defender of the light. But sometimes his brilliant plans went too far, leaving behind ruined lives, dangerous experiments, and risky manipulations. Was he truly a noble mentor or a cold, calculating player who moved pieces on the chessboard of the wizarding world? Today I will tell you about moments when Dumbledore crossed the line. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Left a child on the doorstep. After Harry's parents were killed, Dumbledore decided to hand the boy over to his aunt Petunia. At first glance, caring for relatives seems like the natural choice. But the way the headmaster of Hogwarts acted is striking in its cruelty. October 31st, a cold autumn night, and there an infant is left on the porch like an unwanted bundle. What if he had only been found in the morning? What if he had frozen? In essence, Harry was abandoned like a stray kitten. Is that how a man considered the wisest wizard alive should behave? Number 2, did nothing to ease Harry's life. What happened next looks even worse. Harry grew up with the Dursleys, who treated him worse than an animal. He was barely fed, constantly humiliated, beaten, forced to work, and spent his childhood in a cupboard under the stairs. In his second year, they even locked him in a room, feeding him through a cat flap. And during all this time, where was Dumbledore? He knew perfectly well under what conditions Harry lived, yet never intervened. The only conclusion is, it was part of his plan. Number 3, turned a blind eye to what was happening at Hogwarts. For many years, Hogwarts remained a place where bullying thrived. As a student, Severus Snape was nearly bullied to death, and Dumbledore did nothing. Harry, too, became a target, first accused of being the heir of Slytherin, then of cheating in the Triwizard tournament, and later of lying about Voldemort's return. Who stood up for him? No one. Not the headmaster, not the teachers. The only one who helped Harry was Moody, and even then it wasn't really him, but a Death Eater in disguise. Dumbledore saw all of this, yet chose silence. Number 4. Constantly set up trials for Harry. There's a theory known as Professor Dumbledore's Great Game, that everything Harry went through was orchestrated by the headmaster himself. And the more you look at the facts, the more logical it seems. The obstacle course, guarding the Philosopher's Stone, which 11-year-old children faced. A basilisk roaming the school, which the headmaster supposedly didn't notice. Even the rescue of Sirius Black fell on Harry and his friends, though Dumbledore could have solved the matter himself. Every trial forged Harry, and shaped him into the perfect weapon against Voldemort. Number 5, did not help Sirius Black. Sirius Black was convicted without trial and thrown into Azkaban. The whole world believed he was a traitor, and no one even tried to investigate. But what is truly shocking is that even Dumbledore, who called himself a defender of justice, did nothing for James Potter's friend. Instead of launching an inquiry, or at least questioning the official version, he simply stayed silent, and allowed Sirius to rot alive among the Dementors. Number 6, judged Tom Riddle as evil from the start. When Dumbledore first met young Tom Riddle, his opinion of the boy was already biased. The matron of the orphanage had described him as a thief and troublemaker, and Dumbledore, instead of seeing a war orphan's tragic fate, merely confirmed his suspicions. He even demonstrated dangerous magic, setting Tom's wardrobe on fire, supposedly to teach him a lesson. But can a child be educated through fear and humiliation? If Dumbledore had shown warmth, Voldemort's story might have turned out differently. Number 7, enslaving Muggles with Grindelwald. Young Albus was full of ambition. His friendship with Grindelwald revealed just how far the future headmaster of Hogwarts was willing to go. They dreamed of a world where Muggles would be subjugated and wizards would rule over them. Dumbledore justified it as the greater good, but the essence remained the same. He was ready to support a plan of enslavement. Only personal tragedy stopped him. But the mere fact that he could think this way proves he was far from the flawless champion of the light that his students believed him to be. Number 8. Using Snape as a pawn. Severus. Snape's life after Lily Potter's death was a prison of guilt. Dumbledore saw that and turned it into a weapon. He demanded Snape's loyalty not with kindness, but with a vow. Protect the boy, protect Harry Potter, the son of the woman you could not save. In the Deathly Hallows, when Snape asks, "You have kept him alive so that he can die at the right moment?" The cruelty of Dumbledore's design is exposed. Snape's devotion to Lily was twisted into chains, binding him to a mission that was never his own. Every step placed Snape in mortal danger. He lived as a double agent, hated by students, despised by colleagues, and feared by Death Eaters. His reputation was shattered, and Dumbledore never repaired it. "Don't tell me now that you've grown to care for the boy," Dumbledore asked mockingly when Snape showed signs of humanity. It was never about Severus's redemption. It was about using his pain as fuel, his love as leverage, and his life as another piece in the grand game against Voldemort. Number 9. Calculating his own death. Dumbledore's final plan was not about peace, but about performance. After the cursed ring of Marvolo Gaunt left him dying, he calculated every step of his exit. He asked Severus Snape to kill him, turning death into a weapon. The act would save Draco Malfoy from becoming a murderer and convince Voldemort that Snape's loyalty was unshakable. But beneath the logic was something chilling. Dumbledore's death was staged like a play, its purpose not mercy but manipulation. The scene on the astronomy tower captures this cold design. Harry, paralyzed under his invisibility cloak, watched as Snape raised his wand. Dumbledore's words were quiet, almost pleading. "Severus, please." Many readers once thought he begged for life. The truth, revealed later, was harsher. He was begging Snape to keep the bargain, to strike him down. It was not desperation, but strategy, a man demanding his own death for the sake of the story he was writing. Snape carried the scar of that night until his last breath. "You ask too much of me," he told Dumbledore before agreeing. And he was right. The choice left him branded as a killer, hated by those he secretly protected, despised even by Harry until the very end. Dumbledore had other options. He could have faced death without dragging another soul into the darkness. Instead, he turned his own passing into an act of political theatre, a masterpiece of calculation but stripped of humanity. Number 10. Manipulating Harry until the end. Harry never knew the full truth until it was too late. Dumbledore kept him moving forward with half-answers and riddles, never once confessing that Harry carried a piece of Voldemort's soul. Instead, he left breadcrumbs, the pensive memories, the tale of the Hallows, and the cryptic notes hidden in Rita Skeeter's book. It was Snape, not Dumbledore, who finally revealed the truth through his dying memories. The boy must die. Those words hit like a curse. Harry was not a hero being guided to victory. He was a weapon being steered to destruction. Dumbledore's manipulation was quiet, but relentless. He never trusted Harry with the whole plan, not even in their last conversation in the tower. He spoke of the greater good, of choices and courage, but never of Harry's inevitable sacrifice. When Harry later walked into the Forbidden Forest, he did so without the clarity that might have come from honesty. In the Deathly Hallows, Rowling writes, "He understood at last that he was the Horcrux Voldemort never meant to make. That understanding came far too late, after years of being kept in the dark." Was it strategy or cruelty? Perhaps both. Dumbledore believed that if Harry had known too soon, he might falter, so he kept him ignorant, moulding him through battles, grief, and loss, until he was ready to lay down his life. It worked. Harry surrendered himself. But the cost of that manipulation was trust. Dumbledore asked for faith without ever giving the truth, and in the end, Harry walked into death, carrying not only a piece of Voldemort, but also the weight of his mentor's silence. Number 11, using children as soldiers in the war. Hogwarts was meant to be a school, yet under Dumbledore it often felt like a battlefield. When Umbridge took control in Harry's 5th year, it was Harry, Hermione and Ron who formed Dumbledore's army. They trained in secret, casting spells that should never have been in the hands of children. We're not learning how to defend ourselves, we're not learning how to pass our OWLs, we're learning how to fight, Harry told the group. Dumbledore never stopped them. In fact, he allowed students to become soldiers long before they were ready. The Triwizard tournament is another haunting example. Harry was just 14, thrown into a contest where death was common. Dumbledore could have removed him. He could have ended the farce when Harry's name came out of the goblet of fire. But instead, he let the boy face dragons, mermaids, and a deadly maze. The result was the death of Cedric Diggory, a bright student who should have had his whole life ahead of him. One boy lived, the other died, and all of it happened under Dumbledore's watch. The final battle at Hogwarts stripped away the illusion completely. Students who should have been in classrooms were fighting Death Eaters in the corridors. Neville Longbottom led the resistance, wielding the sword of Gryffindor. Seamus Finnegan hurled curses that lit up the night. Children, barely of age, stood against trained killers. "We're all going to keep fighting, Harry, you know that?" Neville said. It was brave, yes, but also terrifying. The headmaster had allowed a school to become a war zone. Dumbledore could have closed Hogwarts. He could have sent the children home, kept them away from Voldemort's reach. Instead, he left them inside the storm, where courage was demanded and safety was impossible. To him, perhaps, every young witch and wizard was another piece on the chessboard, another soldier in a war he had been fighting since his youth. But in the end, it was not the Order of the Phoenix that bore the heaviest losses. It was the children of Hogwarts. Number 12, deadly silence and withheld truths. Dumbledore's greatest weapon was knowledge, yet it was also his greatest crime. He knew about the prophecy spoken by Sybil Trelawney in the dingy room of the Hog's Head Inn. He knew it spoke of a child with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. And he knew Voldemort would hunt that child down. Still, he chose silence. He gave James and Lily no warning beyond vague advice. By the time Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow, it was too late. The Potters died under the shadow of secrets that could have saved them. Even when Harry returned to Hogwarts, the silence continued. Dumbledore refused to tell him about the Horcruxes until the very end. Instead, he dropped clues like breadcrumbs. In The Half-Blood Prince, Harry demands answers. "You've been keeping this from me? You knew all this time?" And Dumbledore, frail but calm, admits he delayed because Harry was too young. But how many lives were lost in the years Harry was kept ignorant? Cedric Diggory's death, Sirius Black's fall through the veil. Were these the results of strategy or hesitation? The weight of Dumbledore's silence is clearest in Harry's frustration. Time and again, the boy faced dangers he could not understand because the truth was withheld. The diary of Tom Riddle, the locket of Slytherin, the ring of Marvolo Gaunt. Each one was a piece of a puzzle Dumbledore already saw. But instead of sharing the picture, he let Harry stumble in the dark. It wasn't wisdom. It was control. A controlled ignorance that cost pain and blood. Dumbledore's defenders say he was protecting Harry, that the burden was too great for a child, but the truth is harsher. He was playing for time, waiting for the perfect moment, while others bled and died. James and Lily, Sirius and Remus, countless members of the Order. His silence became a weapon just as sharp as Voldemort's wand. And in the end, the boy who lived carried scars not only from the Dark Lord, but also from the man who chose not to speak. Number 13. Playing with the fates of the Dursley brothers. Harry's years at Privet Drive were not just miserable, they were cruel by design. Dumbledore left him on the doorstep of Petunia Dursley with a simple letter, trusting that blood protection would outweigh human decency. But he knew how that family treated him. He knew Petunia had despised her sister's world, and that Vernon saw Harry as a burden. Still, the boy was forced to live in a cupboard under the stairs, treated as less than human. In the Sorcerer's Stone, Rowling writes, Harry had lived with the Dursleys almost 10 years, 10 miserable years, as long as he could remember. That misery was not an accident. The Dursleys were not just cruel to Harry, they also poisoned their own son. Dudley Dursley grew up spoiled, encouraged in his greed and bullying. Dumbledore knew the danger of that household. He knew Harry was being broken, and Dudley twisted, yet he did nothing to stop it. The result? One boy grew up bruised and hungry, the other violent and selfish. In the end, both children were casualties of a choice that was supposed to protect only one of them. Harry's suffering was visible to anyone who looked closely. When Hagrid first met him, the half-giant was horrified to learn the truth. "You've never told him." "Never told him what was in the letter Dumbledore left?" Hagrid shouted at the Dursleys. The outrage was real, but it came years too late. Dumbledore had entrusted Harry's entire childhood to people who hated him, and then simply turned away. Was that neglect or calculation? Some argue Dumbledore wanted Harry's pain to shape him, to harden him into the only wizard strong enough to face Voldemort. But what kind of mentor believes abuse is an education? Harry may have been protected by blood magic, but every beating word, every night in the cupboard, was also part of that protection. The question remains, did Dumbledore really not see, or did he quietly accept cruelty as the price for creating a hero? Number 14. Supporting the lie about Harry's death. When Harry finally learned that he was a Horcrux, the truth hit like a blow. The boy who had fought monsters, dementors, and even death itself was suddenly told that his own existence was tied to Voldemort's survival. This was no accident. It was part of Dumbledore's grand design. The headmaster had always known, yet he chose silence. He allowed Harry to walk into that terrible moment unprepared, and when Harry realized what had to be done, he believed there was no other way but sacrifice. The forest scene makes it painfully clear. Harry walks with the resurrection stone, surrounded by the shades of James, Lily, Sirius, and Remus. He whispers, "I'm about to die." The words are chilling. Dumbledore had guided him here all along, never offering an alternative, never sharing the full truth until it was too late. In that instant, Harry was not just a boy, he was the weapon, the sacrifice, the symbol of hope that Dumbledore had crafted. But what if there had been another option? Could the greatest wizard of the age not find another way? Dumbledore chose not to. He accepted the prophecy as an absolute, and he built a philosophy around Harry's death. Even Snape was shocked when Dumbledore revealed the truth. "You have been raising him like a pig for slaughter," Snape spat, his voice full of loathing. That single line shatters the illusion of benevolence. It shows the cruelty hidden beneath the wisdom. Dumbledore's decision was not an act of kindness. It was cold calculation. He wanted Harry to go willingly, to embrace death so others would fight on. The boy's death was meant to be the spark, the symbol, the proof that love conquers darkness. And yet behind that noble idea was a chilling reality. Harry was deceived. He was denied choice. He was denied truth. And Dumbledore, the man trusted above all, was the one who allowed the lie to live until the very end. Number 15. Trusting prophecies too much. The moment Professor Sybil Trelawney spoke the prophecy in the smoky back room of the Hog's Head Inn, the course of the wizarding world shifted forever. Her words, uttered in that strange, rasping voice that seemed to come from outside herself, carried an authority no one in the room could fully grasp. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month, dies. These words, overheard by Severus Snape and carried swiftly to Lord Voldemort, set into motion a chain of decisions that would cost countless lives. Yet the most unsettling part of this story is not Trelawney's prediction, but how much faith Albus Dumbledore, the wisest wizard of his age, placed in it. Rather than treating the prophecy as a warning to be handled with caution, he treated it as a map, a blueprint of fate that dictated strategy, and in doing so he turned it into a trap for both Harry Potter and Voldemort. Dumbledore often prided himself on resisting the lure of power. He famously turned down the position of Minister for Magic more than once, preferring the relative quiet of Hogwarts. But in the matter of the prophecy, his actions betray a man captivated by the idea of destiny. He believed so strongly that Voldemort would bring about his own downfall by targeting the boy described in Trelawney's vision that he shaped every major decision of the war around this idea. The tragedy is that this interpretation, far from neutralizing the threat, created the very conditions. Voldemort needed to mark Harry as his equal. Neither can live while the other survives, Trelawney had said, and by allowing Voldemort to learn even part of that message, Dumbledore guaranteed that prophecy and reality would intertwine. Consider how narrowly the prophecy applied. Both Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom fit the description of a child born as the 7th month dies. Both had parents who defied Voldemort 3 times. Yet Dumbledore, though aware of the dual possibility, did nothing to shield either family with extraordinary measures. It was Voldemort's choice to see Harry as the threat that finalized the path. One could argue that without Dumbledore's reliance on the prophecy, Voldemort might never have targeted the Potters at all. In that case, James and Lily would have lived, Harry would have grown up unknown, and perhaps the war would have taken another direction entirely. Instead, Dumbledore's quiet acceptance of prophecy as truth meant he prepared for a future where Harry was marked from birth as the chosen one. The chilling irony is that prophecies in the wizarding world are not certainties, but possibilities. The Hall of Prophecy in the Department of Mysteries is filled with fragile glass spheres containing thousands of predictions, many of which never came true. Dumbledore himself admitted this in Order of the Phoenix, when he explained to Harry that it was Voldemort's own decision that gave the prophecy power. It was, however, the decision of Voldemort which made it come true, he said, acknowledging that fate required human choices to be realized. Yet by teaching Harry to think of himself as bound by prophecy, Dumbledore reinforced the inevitability of this tragic cycle rather than challenging it. This trust in prophecy also shaped Dumbledore's controversial strategy of keeping Harry in the dark for so long. For years, Harry was treated like a pawn on a chessboard, shuffled into danger with only partial truths given to him. Dumbledore justified this by claiming he wished to protect Harry's childhood for as long as possible, but in reality he was also waiting for the boy to be ready to fulfill what he saw as destiny. The prophecy had told him Harry would have to face Voldemort, and so Dumbledore raised him for that very task. Instead of focusing on finding alternative solutions, destroying Voldemort without binding a child's life to it, he allowed Harry's existence to revolve around the eventual confrontation. When Harry finally learned the prophecy in the headmaster's office, the weight of it nearly crushed him. "It means me?" he asked, staring in disbelief at the swirling memory. He understood in that instant that he had no true choice, that his life had been shaped around this one confrontation. Though Dumbledore attempted to soften the blow by telling him, "It is essential that you understand this," Voldemort himself created his own worst enemy, just as prophecy foretold. The truth remained that Harry had never been free. The headmaster's unwavering faith in a prediction sealed his path long before he was old enough to decide anything for himself. Another tragic consequence of Dumbledore's faith in prophecy was the way it ensnared Severus Snape. Snape who had only partially overheard Trelawney's words and carried them to Voldemort, set the chain of events in motion that led to Lily Potter's death. When Snape later begged Dumbledore to protect her, Dumbledore was already convinced of the prophecy's inevitability. He tried, but his efforts were not to shield Lily for her own sake. Rather, they were part of preparing for Harry's role as the chosen one. The lifelong guilt Snape carried, the double life he endured, all stemmed from this moment of prophecy and from Dumbledore's decision to treat it as truth rather than chance. Dumbledore's strategy in the final war years also reveals his reliance on prophecy. He spent enormous effort hunting down Horcruxes, not only because they were the key to defeating Voldemort, but also because he believed Harry had to be prepared for the moment of self-sacrifice. His calculated silence about Harry being a Horcrux until the very end reflects this cold logic. "You were the 7th Horcrux, Harry," he eventually revealed, but only after ensuring events had played out, as the prophecy demanded. To many readers, this feels like manipulation, guiding Harry to an inevitable confrontation with death because Dumbledore believed destiny demanded it. Number 16. Exploiting Hagrid's loyalty. Rubeus Hagrid's life is painted with a brush of loyalty. From the very beginning, his devotion to Albus Dumbledore was absolute, almost unquestioning. He was expelled from Hogwarts under false accusations and stripped of his wand, yet it was Dumbledore who offered him refuge, appointing him keeper of keys and grounds. For Hagrid, this act was salvation, a gesture of kindness that bound his heart forever to the headmaster. But loyalty can be a dangerous chain. The trust Hagrid placed in Dumbledore was so deep that he never questioned the risks imposed upon him, even when those risks seemed disproportionate, reckless, or deliberately manipulative. Dumbledore, who often emphasized freedom of choice, seemed to use Hagrid's blind devotion as a tool to carry out his plans that were too dangerous for others to accept. The very first example of this manipulation is tied to Harry Potter himself. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, it is Hagrid who is tasked with retrieving the orphaned child from the wreckage of his ruined home. Sirius Black, Harry's godfather and a skilled wizard, arrived first and offered to take Harry into his care. Hagrid refused, citing Dumbledore's instructions. "Dumbledore's orders," he said firmly, placing the baby into his giant arms. It was a moment that established the hierarchy. Even when alternatives existed, Hagrid would obey Dumbledore's command above all else. Was it necessary for a man? With no magical expertise and a history of being careless with details to escort a child who had just become the center of the wizarding world? Perhaps not. Yet Dumbledore chose Hagrid, knowing full well that he would never question him. This decision reflects not trust alone, but also a willingness to exploit Hagrid's devotion for the sake of control. Later, the pattern becomes clearer. When the Sorcerer's Stone is hidden within Hogwarts, Hagrid unwittingly becomes the weak link. Quirinus Quirrell, under the influence of Voldemort, manipulates Hagrid into revealing the secret to calming Fluffy, the three-headed dog. How does Quirrell achieve this? By appealing to Hagrid's greatest passion, strange creatures. A dragon's egg, offered in a suspicious deal at a pub, is enough to loosen Hagrid's tongue. Dumbledore must have known that Hagrid's love for dangerous beasts was a liability, yet he entrusted him with guarding one of the most critical protections in the school. This was less a gesture of faith and more a convenient way of setting up a pawn. When things unraveled, Hagrid bore the blame for the breach, while Dumbledore remained untouched, the orchestrator behind the scenes. Perhaps the most glaring example of manipulation comes in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. When the school is threatened by the re-emergence of the basilisk, Hagrid is the one sent to Azkaban as a scapegoat. Though innocent, he is sacrificed as a gesture to placate fear, while Dumbledore offers little visible resistance to this injustice. His removal from the castle is symbolic. Hagrid is loyal enough to bear humiliation and imprisonment without complaint, while Dumbledore gains political breathing room. In this, we see the darker side of leadership, the calculated sacrifice of the devoted subordinate for the sake of the larger strategy. Hagrid emerges from Azkaban broken, but still devoted, never questioning why Dumbledore did not protect him more forcefully. The missions Dumbledore assigns to Hagrid become increasingly perilous as the series continues. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Hagrid is sent to parley with the Giants. This task, which would intimidate even the most skilled members of the Order, is entrusted to Hagrid and Madame Melamp Maxime. Why them? Because Dumbledore knows that Hagrid, being half-giant himself, would feel personally responsible for convincing his kin to resist Voldemort. Yet the mission is reckless. The Giants are violent, volatile, and hostile to outsiders. Hagrid is beaten, nearly killed, and returns to Hogwarts bloodied and scarred. The mission yields no lasting success, and one cannot help but wonder whether Dumbledore knowingly sent Hagrid into a task doomed to fail, simply because he needed someone too loyal to refuse. Hagrid's loyalty is further exploited in his relationship with Aragog. In Chamber of Secrets, Harry and Ron follow the trail of suspicion back to Hagrid, who directs them to the giant acromantula he raised during his school years. Hagrid knows Aragog's lair is lethal, yet he trusts the monster to spare his friends. This trust nearly gets the boys killed. But the larger question is, why would Dumbledore, who certainly knew about Aragog's colony in the Forbidden Forest, never step in to address such a dangerous presence? It seems as though Dumbledore relied on Hagrid to manage the threat. Indifferent to the risks posed to students or to Hagrid himself. Once again, Hagrid is made the keeper of burdens no one else will bear. The Triwizard tournament provides another unsettling example. When Harry is selected as a champion in Goblet of Fire, Hagrid eagerly assists by showing him the dragons he must face. The headmaster could have chosen a more cautious approach, but instead it is Hagrid who brings Harry into direct contact with the Hungarian Horntail. His blind trust in Dumbledore's plans pushes him to expose Harry to immense danger under the guise of preparation. While Hagrid's excitement is genuine, it also reveals how easily his devotion can be harnessed to serve Dumbledore's strategies, no matter how perilous. What makes Hagrid particularly vulnerable is his nature. He is kind, gentle with creatures others fear, and deeply insecure about his place in the wizarding world. Expelled at a young age, he clings to the validation Dumbledore provides. Every mission, no matter how dangerous, becomes for him a chance to prove his worth. Dumbledore understands this. His decision to send Hagrid into battle, into exile, into danger, is always framed as trust. "I would trust Hagrid with my life," he says more than once. Yet trust is only part of the story. Trust without protection becomes exploitation, and in Hagrid's case, it meant a lifetime of unnecessary risks. Number 17, hiding behind the mask of a kind old man. Albus Dumbledore stood at the heart of the wizarding world as the image of warmth and benevolence, the headmaster who offered lemon drops to nervous students and greeted every new face with twinkling eyes. Yet behind that carefully maintained exterior lay a mind calculating every move, orchestrating events with the precision of a chess master. Students saw a kindly grandfather figure. The Order of the Phoenix saw a leader of unshakable wisdom. But beneath both impressions lived a strategist who had long accepted that human lives were pieces on a board. This duality, smiling mentor and ruthless planner, defined the man Harry Potter trusted most, even as the truth emerged only in fragments, revealed too late for comfort. The clearest illustration of this divide between mask and reality comes in Dumbledore's relationship with Harry himself. From the beginning, Harry was not only a student, but a weapon in Dumbledore's grand design, a boy burdened with a prophecy that foretold his confrontation with Voldemort. Dumbledore shielded Harry with apparent care, arranging protections, offering advice, and maintaining the illusion of safety within Hogwarts. But every protective gesture was counterbalanced by a deeper, more unsettling reality. Dumbledore never intended to keep Harry safe forever. He intended for Harry to die at the right time, to willingly walk into death so that the Dark Lord could be defeated. Harry's life was not protected so much as preserved until the necessary sacrifice had to be made. The moment when Dumbledore's plans crossed the line into cold calculation is perhaps most evident in the way he handled the prophecy about Harry and Voldemort. "Neither can live while the other survives," the prophecy declared. Dumbledore could have chosen to tell Harry early, to prepare him fully for the role fate had set. Instead, he withheld it for years, allowing Harry to stumble in the dark, to suffer loss after loss, all under the comforting shadow of a mentor who seemed to care deeply. When Dumbledore finally confessed the full truth, it was accompanied by the devastating revelation that Harry was a marked man and that Voldemort must kill him. The benevolent headmaster had become the architect of a plan that demanded the death of his own pupil, and he concealed it until it was too late for Harry to rebel. Another instance that exposes the depths of Dumbledore's strategy is his calculated decision to allow Draco Malfoy to attempt murder during Harry's 6th year. Dumbledore knew from the beginning that Voldemort had tasked Draco with killing him, yet he let the boy wander through the school, carrying out half-baked assassination attempts. The headmaster was not blind to the danger. He understood Draco was a pawn, set up to fail and likely to die. But rather than stop the plot outright, Dumbledore turned it into an opportunity, using Severus Snape to create a binding agreement that would preserve Draco's soul and ensure Snape's loyalty. In effect, Dumbledore gambled with Draco's life and conscience to strengthen his own network of control. He was willing to let a 16-year-old spiral toward murder just to ensure the pieces fell into place. Perhaps even darker was Dumbledore's treatment of Snape, a man bound to him by guilt and desperation. When Snape begged him to protect Lily Potter, Dumbledore agreed, but not out of pure kindness. He recognized an opportunity, a broken man who could be shaped into a weapon. Dumbledore pressed Snape into service, chaining him with promises, remorse, and the possibility of redemption. Their relationship was never one of equals. Snape's devotion was twisted into a tool, and when the time came, Dumbledore demanded the ultimate proof of loyalty, that Snape kill him to secure Voldemort's trust. The good grandfather of Hogwarts did not simply forgive a sinner. He weaponized that sinner's guilt, ensuring Snape remained bound until his final breath. The facade of geniality extended even to moments when Dumbledore manipulated Harry's choices under the guise of offering freedom. He often spoke about the importance of choice, insisting, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Yet many of the choices Harry faced were framed by Dumbledore's design. When Harry discovered the Mirror of Erised, it seemed a harmless lesson about desire. But it was Dumbledore who directed Harry to it, subtly reminding him of what he lacked, knowing that his longing for family would keep him tethered to the fight ahead. The same happened with the Triwizard tournament, where Dumbledore watched events spiral out of control, yet still refrained from pulling Harry out, even as it became clear that the boy was being targeted. Dumbledore framed Harry's suffering as experience, but in truth, each step prepared him for the destiny Dumbledore had chosen. Even in moments of apparent vulnerability, Dumbledore's hand remained steady on the chessboard. When he revealed the cursed injury spreading from Marvellogaunt's ring, he admitted to Harry that his time was limited, but rather than pass leadership to others or attempt to lessen the burden, Dumbledore used his approaching death as a stage. He allowed Snape to become the executioner, an act that would secure the spy's place at Voldemort's side. Dumbledore's death was not an accident, nor even a noble sacrifice, but a meticulously planned maneuver. The kindly figure who once handed out sweets and reassured frightened first years orchestrated his own murder to maintain control long after his body was gone. Number 18. The Dark Secret of Ariana Dumbledore. Of all the tragedies that cast their shadows across the wizarding world, few remain as haunting and enigmatic as the death of Ariana Dumbledore. She was not a famous witch, nor did she stand on the grand stages of magical politics. Yet her story lingers in whispers because of the heavy silence surrounding it, a silence maintained by none other than her brother, Albus Dumbledore. The headmaster of Hogwarts, celebrated as a visionary and leader in the fight against Voldemort, was once a young man whose ambition came at an unimaginable cost, and that cost was his sister's life. To understand the weight of this silence, one must revisit the fateful summer when youthful arrogance, dangerous alliances, and unchecked dreams spiraled into a loss that would haunt Albus for the rest of his life. Ariana was only 6 years old when she became the victim of a violent attack by 3 Muggle boys who had seen her performing accidental magic. The trauma was not just physical but psychological, and it changed her life irreversibly. She could no longer control her powers, which erupted in dangerous and unpredictable bursts. Percival Dumbledore, her father, struck back at the boys and was sent to Azkaban, where he died, never revealing the truth to protect his daughter. Kendra, her mother, retreated with Ariana to Godric's Hollow, keeping her hidden from the world. In this fragile and secretive household, Albus was forced into the role of reluctant caretaker after his mother's sudden death. What followed was not simply the story of a brother protecting a sister, it was the beginning of Albus's descent into dangerous ambition, fueled by his new friendship with Gellert Grindelwald. The relationship between Albus and Gellert was intoxicating, a meeting of 2 brilliant minds intoxicated by the idea of remaking the wizarding world. They spoke of power, of dominance over Muggles, of a greater good. But while Albus became absorbed in these grand ideas, Ariana remained confined and unstable. Aberforth, the younger brother, never forgave Albus for neglecting her. As Aberforth would later recount, he did not want to be burdened with her, he wanted to be free for his plans with Grindelwald. These words paint Albus not as the wise and compassionate figure we see later in life, but as a young man willing to silence his sister's suffering for the sake of a political dream. The contradiction between family duty and visionary ambition created a storm that would culminate in Ariana's tragic death. The night of the fatal duel remains one of the greatest mysteries in the Harry Potter saga. We know that a confrontation broke out between Aberforth, Albus, and Gellert Grindelwald. Aberforth accused his elder brother of neglect and betrayal, and Grindelwald, ever hungry for conflict, responded with violence. In that chaotic moment, Ariana, overwhelmed by the emotions and the surge of uncontrolled magic around her, tried to intervene or perhaps lost control entirely. What followed was described later with chilling simplicity. It was not clear whose curse had killed her. This line, delivered by Aberforth to Harry in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, stands as one of the most haunting revelations of the series. For 3 brilliant duelists to unleash their power in such proximity to a fragile, unstable girl, there could hardly have been a more dangerous situation. The ambiguity of who delivered the final blow became the cruelest wound of all. For Aberforth, the blame was clear. He never forgave Albus, not only because Ariana died under their roof, but because of the secrecy that followed. Albus never confessed, never clarified, never spoke of that moment beyond vague acknowledgments of regret. He buried himself in work, in his career, in the facade of wisdom and benevolence that made him the most admired wizard of his time. But beneath the image of the great headmaster of Hogwarts was a man who had abandoned truth for reputation. Aberforth's accusation decades later, when he confronted Harry, Ron and Hermione at the Hog's Head, revealed just how raw the wound remained. His words were not only those of a grieving brother, but also of a man who had been silenced by Albus's long shadow. The silence itself is perhaps the most damning element of the story. By refusing to speak openly about Ariana, Albus denied her the dignity of remembrance and denied his family the closure of truth. This silence was strategic. To admit that the great Dumbledore might have killed his own sister, whether by accident or recklessness, would have tarnished his reputation beyond repair. To admit that his alliance with Grindelwald indirectly caused the tragedy would have cast doubt on his later moral authority in the war against Voldemort. And so Albus chose silence, a silence that preserved his image, but left his family broken. In this choice, one sees the sharp contrast between the celebrated headmaster and the flawed young man he once was. This decision to conceal the truth mirrors a recurring theme in Dumbledore's life: his tendency to manipulate and control narratives. He carefully chose what to reveal and when, always shaping events to fit a broader plan. Harry himself was not exempt from this strategy. Dumbledore withheld crucial information from him for years, believing that timing and secrecy were necessary for the boy to fulfill his destiny. But if Ariana's tragedy teaches us anything, it is that secrecy comes at a cost. In Ariana's case, the cost was unbearable grief for Aberforth and unanswered questions that haunted every interaction between the surviving brothers. 1. Cannot help but see Ariana's story as a cautionary tale about Dumbledore's obsession with control. Ariana's magic, unstable and destructive, may have been more than a tragic condition. Some fans and scholars have speculated that she was an obscurial, a witch whose repressed powers manifest as a dangerous parasitic force. If this theory holds true, it casts her death in an even darker light. The duel may have unleashed her obscurus, killing her in a violent eruption. If Albus suspected this, it would explain even more clearly his silence. To admit Ariana's nature would not only expose her suffering, but also connect his family to one of the most feared magical conditions. She was never right again, Aberforth said, summing up her fragile state. If Dumbledore knew she was an obscurial, his silence becomes not just personal shame, but also a way to bury knowledge that might have unsettled the wizarding world. In this sense, the tragedy of Ariana's death was not just a personal loss, but a turning point in magical history. Grindelwald fled, Albus abandoned his dreams of dominance, and Aberforth withdrew into bitterness. Yet Albus transformed the tragedy into a mask, allowing it to fuel his caution, his wisdom, and his reputation as the reluctant hero. But was this transformation truly noble, or was it another form of manipulation, turning private guilt into public credibility? That is the uncomfortable question Ariana's ghost forces us to ask. Dumbledore built his greatness upon a silence that concealed the darkest truth of his youth. Consider how differently history might have judged him had he spoken openly. Imagine Albus Dumbledore admitting before the wizarding world that in his youthful arrogance he bore responsibility for his sister's death. Imagine him confessing that his alliance with Grindelwald had led to disaster within his own family. Such honesty would have cost him influence, yes, but it might also have brought a more human dimension to his legend. Instead, he chose the path of concealment, which protected his role as a leader, but denied his family the peace of honesty. Aberforth's bitterness, Ariana's silence, and Albus's careful reputation together form a triangle of tragedy. The consequences of that silence ripple through the entire Harry Potter narrative. When Harry meets Dumbledore in King's Cross after his death, the headmaster admits that he had been blinded by his ambition in youth. "I was gifted, I was brilliant, I wanted to escape, I wanted to shine, I wanted glory," he tells Harry. Yet even in this moment of confession, he does not directly name the truth of Ariana's death. He skirts around it, implying regret but refusing clarity. This final evasion underscores the theme. Dumbledore always went too far in his plans, whether with Grindelwald, with Harry, or with the concealment of Ariana's fate. The silence also had an impact on Harry's understanding of Dumbledore. Throughout the books, Harry revered him, trusted him, and followed his guidance. But the revelations about Ariana, about Grindelwald, and about Dumbledore's youthful arrogance shattered that idealized image. Harry was forced to confront the truth that his greatest mentor was not infallible, that he had made mistakes of devastating magnitude, and yet in accepting this truth, Harry also understood something essential, that greatness does not come from perfection, but from how one carries guilt and regret. Dumbledore's silence was a flaw, but it was also a burden he carried until his last breath. The story of Ariana Dumbledore remains a haunting reminder that even the greatest figures of the wizarding world are not immune to the consequences of their choices. In Albus's silence, we see the price of ambition unchecked, the wounds left by secrecy, and the danger of sacrificing truth for reputation. Ariana's tragedy is not just the story of a lost sister. It is the story of a man who, in his quest for greatness, went too far and never found the courage to fully confront the shadow he had created. And in that silence lies the darkest secret of Albus Dumbledore's life. Number 19. Setting up Harry in the Triwizard Tournament. Of all the turning points in Harry Potter's journey, none feels more suspiciously orchestrated than the events of the Triwizard Tournament. Officially, Albus Dumbledore claimed that Harry's name was entered into the Goblet of Fire by an unknown force, a cruel trick meant to endanger the boy. But when one examines the details of each task, the peculiar convenience of the obstacles, and the ultimate confrontation with Voldemort, the picture begins to look less like an accident and more like a carefully engineered design. It is impossible to ignore that Dumbledore, the master strategist, allowed a 14-year-old boy to compete in a deadly tournament without ever seriously attempting to remove him, and the consequence of that choice was the resurrection of the Dark Lord. When Harry's name first emerged from the goblet, the atmosphere in the Great Hall was one of shock. Even Dumbledore, normally the epitome of calm, hurried to Harry and pressed him with the famous question, "Did you put your name into the Goblet of Fire?" The book emphasizes the disbelief in the room. Yet after this moment of outrage, the supposed protectors of the school quickly settled into acceptance. The binding magical contract was used as justification, a vague explanation that Harry must compete. But Dumbledore, with his encyclopedic knowledge of magic, had always been the man who found loopholes where others saw walls. Why then did he not push harder to free Harry from the binding? It is as if he knew that Harry's participation was not a mistake, but rather a necessary piece of the puzzle he himself had drawn. The first task, involving dragons, immediately raised questions. A young wizard with limited training should have been crushed under such a challenge. Yet Harry, through a combination of luck, bravery, and a timely tip from Hagrid and Moody, managed to summon his firebolt broom and retrieve the golden egg. This victory seemed improbable, but somehow inevitable. The question is not whether Harry was brave, he certainly was, but why the adults allowed him to be placed in that situation in the first place. Dumbledore, who observed silently, gave no protest. The trial did not destroy Harry. Instead, it showcased his flying skill, the very talent that made him stand out in Quidditch. Was this not perfectly arranged to highlight Harry's strength rather than his weakness? The second task involved rescuing loved ones from the depths of the Black Lake. The champions were forced to retrieve hostages, friends placed under magical sleep, while navigating merfolk and the suffocating pressure of the water. Harry, of course, had no knowledge of advanced magical breathing techniques, yet conveniently he was tipped off about gillyweed, an obscure plant, by Professor Moody, later revealed to be Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise. Again, this appears at first glance to be the interference of an enemy. But what if the supposed enemy's guidance was still part of the broader pattern Dumbledore tolerated? For Harry, this task turned into a showcase of his moral compass. He refused to leave Gabrielle Delacour behind, even though only Ron was his hostage. He risked losing points because he placed compassion over competition. As if scripted, the judges rewarded him for moral fibre. Once again, the design of the task produced the very outcome that Dumbledore valued most in Harry: courage mixed with selflessness. By the time of the third task, the Triwizard Maze, the sense of inevitability had grown too strong to ignore. The maze was meant to be a test of endurance and cunning, but it also conveniently funneled Harry toward the centre, side by side with Cedric Diggory. The obstacles, blast-ended scroots, boggarts and enchanted hedges, were formidable but not insurmountable. Harry, with Cedric, reached the Triwizard Cup. But rather than being celebrated as co-champions, the cup was transformed into a portkey that dragged both boys to a graveyard, directly into the arms of Voldemort and his followers. Here, the supposed culmination of the tournament exposed its darkest twist. Cedric was killed, and Harry witnessed the full ritual of Voldemort's return, including the use of Harry's blood. This was the very ingredient the Dark Lord had long required to regain a body. It was too perfect, too direct, to be dismissed as mere coincidence. What makes the situation even more troubling is Dumbledore's reaction afterward. When Harry returned to Hogwarts with Cedric's body, Dumbledore did not express shock that the cup had been turned into a portkey. Instead, he listened calmly, asked Harry to recount his story in detail, and immediately began preparing the Order of the Phoenix for Voldemort's return. It is as though he had been waiting for this moment, needing confirmation that the Dark Lord had risen again. The tragedy of Cedric's death was almost overshadowed by Dumbledore's focus on the larger war. Harry had been manoeuvred into position to deliver the very intelligence Dumbledore required to rally his allies. One cannot help but notice that Dumbledore, who claimed to love Harry like family, had a history of exposing him to dangerous trials, from the Philosopher's Stone, where he allowed an 11-year-old to confront traps meant for adult wizards, to the Chamber of Secrets, where the boy fought the Basilisk, and later to the Cave of Horcruxes. Dumbledore consistently allowed Harry to face mortal peril. The Triwizard Tournament was not an exception but a culmination of this pattern. It is not enough to say Dumbledore believed in Harry's strength. The truth seems harsher. Dumbledore needed Harry to face Voldemort at every turn because Harry's survival was tied to the Dark Lord's downfall. The moral problem becomes glaring when one considers Harry's age during the tournament. At 14, he was barely past his third year at Hogwarts. He was still struggling with basic defensive spells, still haunted by nightmares of Dementors. Dumbledore, who knew the prophecy that linked Harry and Voldemort, also knew that one could not live while the other survived. Every risk Harry endured pushed him closer to that final confrontation. Yet, rather than shielding him until the proper time, Dumbledore seemed to accelerate the process. When viewed this way, the Triwizard Tournament feels less like a prank of dark forces and more like the deliberate sharpening of a weapon. Skeptics may argue that Dumbledore had no control over Barty Crouch Jr., who impersonated Moody and manipulated events, but the reality is that Crouch Jr. moved under Dumbledore's very nose for an entire school year. Could the great Albus Dumbledore, master of legilimency, one of the most perceptive minds in wizarding history, truly have missed all signs of the impostor? Or did he choose to look the other way until the plan unfolded? In this light, Dumbledore's inaction is as telling as his actions. He allowed Crouch Jr. to guide Harry, allowed the boy to survive just long enough to be delivered to Voldemort at the critical moment. It is revealing to recall Dumbledore's own words in Order of the Phoenix. He told Harry, "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth, more for your peace of mind than my plan." The admission shows that he always had a plan, one that included Harry as its centerpiece. The Triwizard Tournament demonstrates how far that plan extended. Harry was not only placed in danger but was used as bait. his blood exploited to restore Voldemort's body. The cost of that maneuver was Cedric's life and Harry's lasting trauma. Yet Dumbledore, instead of condemning the injustice, folded it neatly into the larger battle. The psychological toll on Harry is often understated. The boy returned from the graveyard not only carrying Cedric's corpse, but also the memory of Voldemort's cruel rebirth. He heard the chant of Death Eaters, saw his parents' shades from Voldemort's wand, and experienced pain that scarred him for years. Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, surely anticipated the outcome of Harry being used in such a ritual. And still he allowed the wheel to turn. Harry's nightmares, his fear, his anger in the following year, all of these were the direct consequences of that night. In many ways, the Triwizard Tournament exposed the harshest side of Dumbledore's philosophy. He believed that the ends justified the means. The end was Voldemort's defeat. The means was Harry's suffering. For readers, the moment Harry touched the cup with Cedric is one of the most haunting in the series, because it reveals that even within Hogwarts, under the guardianship of the most respected wizard of the age, Harry was never truly safe. The school, the tournament, the mentors around him, all were pieces of a larger game board where Harry himself was both pawn and weapon. If one strips away the admiration for Dumbledore's brilliance, what remains is a man who allowed a child to be thrust into an arena where the final prize was not glory, but blood. The Triwizard Tournament should have been remembered as a celebration of magical skill between schools. Instead, it became the stage for Voldemort's resurrection, with Harry unwillingly cast as the star performer. Whether by design or by negligence, Dumbledore's hand is unmistakably present in every step that led Harry to that graveyard, and that is the uncomfortable truth many fans prefer to overlook. The Triwizard Year proves that Dumbledore was willing to gamble with the life of the very boy he claimed to protect. Each challenge, each escape, each brush with death only reinforced the sense that Harry was being prepared, shaped, even sacrificed for the greater good. And while history may judge Dumbledore kindly as the leader who guided the wizarding world through its darkest hour, the scar on Harry's forehead is not the only mark of that war. The deeper scar lies in the fact that long before Voldemort struck him in that graveyard, Harry had already been betrayed by the man who was supposed to shield him from harm. Number 20, using Fawkes and the Order of the Phoenix as tools. Fawkes was more than a bird. He was the embodiment of rebirth, resilience, and silent loyalty. Yet when one examines his appearances in the story, a troubling pattern emerges. Fawkes never acted independently in any significant way. He always arrived at moments that served Dumbledore's designs. In the Chamber of Secrets, the Phoenix appeared to Harry at the very edge of defeat, bringing the sorting hat that held the sword of Gryffindor. On the surface, this was a symbol of destiny and courage, but the deeper question is this: was it Harry's courage that summoned Fawkes, or Dumbledore's invisible hand directing the course of events? The timing felt orchestrated, as if Dumbledore had planted yet another safeguard in the life of the boy he was shaping into a weapon. When Harry later reflected on that moment, Dumbledore told him, "You must have shown me real loyalty down in the chamber. Nothing but that could have called Fawkes to you." The words are comforting, but they also reveal something darker. Fawkes was not free. His bond was not with Harry as an individual, but with Harry's loyalty to Dumbledore. The Phoenix was not a creature of independent judgment, but a magical tool, drawn to devotion for his master. In this sense, Fawkes became not a guardian spirit, but an extension of Dumbledore's power, another piece on the board. The symbolism stretches further with the very name of the group Dumbledore created, the Order of the Phoenix. On the surface, it was noble, a society of resistance fighters standing against Voldemort's terror. But naming his resistance after his own creature and binding its identity to that fiery bird turned the entire organization into an emblem of himself. The phoenix dies and is reborn, but in war, death was not always followed by rebirth. The irony is sharp. While the Order fought bravely, many of its members did not return from the ashes. Take the case of Sirius Black. Sirius joined the Order out of loyalty to Dumbledore and to Harry, his godson. He longed for action, but instead found himself trapped inside Grimmauld Place, restless and bitter, a lion in a cage. Dumbledore knew Sirius was unstable, knew he was a target for manipulation by Voldemort, and yet continued to keep him as a player in the larger scheme. The outcome was inevitable. At the Department of Mysteries, Sirius fell through the veil, another casualty in the war. It is hard not to see his death as the result of Dumbledore's willingness to let pawns move freely on the board, even when those pawns were his supposed friends. The deaths did not end with Sirius. Amelia Bones, a respected witch who upheld justice within the Ministry, was murdered by Voldemort himself. She was a member of the Order who had represented one of its strongest connections to the legal framework of the wizarding world. Her assassination was a political and moral blow. Dumbledore mourned her, but his plans did not change. The Order carried on, diminished, but still marching in the direction he had set. The question lingers, did he ever stop to consider whether his strategy was consuming too many lives, or was the grand vision always more important? Dumbledore's philosophy of sacrifice is evident in the way he spoke to Harry about death. Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love. The statement resonates with wisdom, but also reveals his detachment. For him, death was a step in the cycle, a cost of resisting evil. Yet for the families of those who fell, Marlene McKinnon, the Prewets, Benji Fenwick, this was not philosophy, but permanent loss. Dumbledore's lofty words could not erase their grief. He spoke as a general from a distance, removed from the human cost. The most striking example of Dumbledore's use of lives as pieces was his treatment of Severus Snape. Snape's devotion to Lily Potter gave Dumbledore the leverage to bind him into a life of double agency, carrying unbearable burdens. Snape's every move was dictated by Dumbledore's orders, from protecting Harry to ultimately preparing him for death. When Snape begged Dumbledore to keep Lily safe, Dumbledore answered coldly, "You disgust me." And yet he still took Snape's service, reshaping it into something useful. For all his brilliance, Dumbledore saw in people not just loyalty, but utility. The line between leader and manipulator blurs when one recalls how Dumbledore handled Harry's destiny. He withheld the prophecy until it was nearly too late, kept secrets about Horcruxes, and even planned for Harry's eventual death as if it were the necessary culmination of his grand design. "You are the true master of death," he told Harry later, but the truth was harsher. Harry was a child molded to walk into slaughter. The Order fought, bled, and died to protect him, but Harry himself was being guided toward a sacrificial altar. Even Fawkes, the most loyal of creatures, abandoned Hogwarts after Dumbledore's death. The symbolism is impossible to ignore. Without Dumbledore, the Phoenix had no purpose. He did not stay for the cause, nor for Harry, nor for the Order. He left because his existence was bound to one man, his choices chained to the hand of Dumbledore. This departure reveals the unsettling truth that Fawkes was never fighting for freedom or justice. He was an instrument of Dumbledore's will, and when that will was gone, so was he. Dumbledore's defenders argue that his sacrifices were necessary, that without him Voldemort would have triumphed. They point to the ultimate victory and say the losses were the inevitable cost of war. Yet the chilling detail lies in Dumbledore's calm acceptance of those losses. He rarely expressed guilt or hesitation. Instead, he cultivated trust so absolute that those around him willingly marched into danger. They loved him, revered him, and followed him, often blind to how much he was asking them to surrender. The battle at the Department of Mysteries is perhaps the clearest example of his indirect orchestration. Dumbledore left Harry vulnerable, knowing Voldemort might exploit the boy's connection to him. The result was a mission undertaken by children, a confrontation that cost Sirius his life and nearly destroyed Harry's circle of friends. Though Dumbledore later admitted his mistake, calling it his greatest failing, the damage was already done. Lives had been lost, trust shattered, and yet the war machine of the Order continued forward under his unseen hand. In the final book, the manipulative side of Dumbledore becomes unavoidable. Through the pensieve, Harry sees the young Dumbledore, intoxicated with Grindelwald's rhetoric about the greater good. That phrase never fully left him. Though he grew wiser, though he recognized the corruption in Grindelwald's vision, he never stopped believing in sacrifice as a path to triumph. His adult strategies were a tempered version of the same youthful dream. Lives could be weighed, plans justified, and if necessary, friends sacrificed for victory. The tragedy is that those who followed Dumbledore often did so without question. Remus Lupin, who lost nearly everything, still placed his trust in Dumbledore's direction. Tonks, whose love for Remus bound her into the war, died in the Battle of Hogwarts, leaving their son an orphan. Were these deaths necessary, or were they another instance of Dumbledore's greater good consuming the people who had believed in him? The phoenix may rise again, but Teddy Lupin would grow up without parents, a casualty of choices made long before his birth. Even Harry, in the end, recognized the complexity of the man he once idolized. At King's Cross, in that strange liminal space between life and death, Harry confronted Dumbledore's past and his choices. He saw the flaws, the secrets, and the manipulation, yet he forgave him, acknowledging that love was at the heart of his mentor's decisions. The forgiveness is moving, but it cannot erase the shadows. The cost was too high, the manipulation too deep, for Dumbledore to escape judgment. He was not simply a wise headmaster, he was also a strategist who played with fire, knowing full well that others would burn. In the end, the legacy of Dumbledore is inseparable from the legacy of the Order of the Phoenix. Both were bound to the symbol of Fawkes, a bird of hope that was, in truth, a creature enslaved to loyalty. The Order stood for resistance, but also for sacrifice demanded by one man's vision. The Phoenix may be a sign of rebirth, but for many who trusted Dumbledore, there was no return from the ashes. The question remains unanswered, echoing like a whisper through the halls of Hogwarts. Did Dumbledore guide the world to salvation, or did he simply push too far, sacrificing too many lives in pursuit of the greater good? Number 21. Allowing chaos to reign at Hogwarts. Albus Dumbledore has always been portrayed as the wise and benevolent headmaster of Hogwarts, yet, if one looks more closely at the unfolding events across Harry Potter's years at school, one begins to see another, far more unsettling image. It is the portrait of a leader who presided over chaos with an almost deliberate calm, a man who allowed dangers to fester rather than extinguishing them, and who seemed to accept peril as a natural climate for the growth of young witches and wizards. Hogwarts was not just a school under Dumbledore, it was a perpetual experiment where the students, knowingly or not, became test subjects in the unfolding drama of his greater designs. The most troubling aspect of this is that Dumbledore seemed to consider every crisis not as a disaster to be prevented, but as an opportunity to reveal hidden courage, test allegiances, and shape future warriors. Consider the infamous night in Harry's very first year when a fully grown mountain troll entered the castle. The event itself is staggering. A magical beast, large enough to crush walls and utterly beyond the capabilities of 11-year-old children to resist, was allowed to wander into the school's very heart. Students were hastily ushered into their dormitories, yet Harry Potter and Ron Weasley managed to encounter the troll in the girls' bathroom where Hermione Granger had been crying. The three children narrowly survived. Dumbledore's response was not to close Hogwarts, or even to suspend classes. He carried on, and the incident faded into legend. The absurdity lies in how easily catastrophe could have struck and how little systemic protection was put in place afterward. It was as though Dumbledore accepted the brush with death as an acceptable price for growth. The following year was worse. When the Chamber of Secrets was opened and students were found petrified, the horror should have forced immediate evacuation. Children were literally dropping in the corridors, frozen by the gaze of a monster none could identify. Filch's cat, Colin Creevey, Justin Finch-Fletchley, and even Hermione herself fell victim to this unseen terror. The obvious decision for any responsible headmaster would have been to close the castle until the threat was neutralized. Yet Dumbledore did not evacuate. Hogwarts continued to function as a place where children slept under the shadow of mortal danger. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware," was scrawled in blood on the walls, and still classes went on. One could argue that Dumbledore's removal from the school by the governors forced his hand, but before that he had done little beyond warning teachers to remain vigilant. Once again, catastrophe was treated as a lesson in resilience. Perhaps the starkest example of this calculated negligence came in Harry's 4th year, when the Triwizard tournament was brought to Hogwarts. A competition notorious for its deadly tasks was reopened despite its grim history. Dumbledore permitted the Goblet of Fire to select a 14-year-old boy, clearly underage, as a 4th champion. Instead of rejecting the result outright, instead of refusing to let Harry participate, Dumbledore insisted the rules bound them, and Harry was compelled to risk his life in contests against dragons, merfolk, and an enchanted maze. It is difficult not to see the hidden hand of orchestration in all of this. Dumbledore himself admitted later that he had suspected Harry might become a target, and yet he did nothing to withdraw him from the stage. The boy who had already faced death more than once was now paraded into yet another test, as if his survival or failure were essential data points in the headmaster's long experiment. The spectre of Voldemort returned at the end of that tournament, and Dumbledore's reaction revealed the depths of his willingness to let fear reign at Hogwarts. He did not attempt to shield the student body from panic. Rather, he told the truth, even though it meant living under constant dread. The following year, Dolores Umbridge was forced upon the school by the Ministry, and Dumbledore appeared powerless to resist. Yet one cannot escape the sense that he allowed this as well, retreating into shadows while children once again became soldiers in a battle far beyond them. Harry, Hermione, and Ron created Dumbledore's army, a name chosen to honor him, but in reality it reflected how deeply his absence left them to fight battles on their own. Hogwarts was not a safe haven. It was a crucible of chaos where children learned war because the headmaster permitted war to come to them. Even more chilling is the way Dumbledore viewed Harry himself. From the beginning, he knew Harry carried a fragment of Voldemort's soul. He knew the boy was a living Horcrux, and that this reality tied Harry inexorably to death. Yet he never revealed the truth until it was nearly too late. "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth," he confessed. In the Deathly Hallows, that admission is not one of benevolence but of manipulation. Harry's entire life at Hogwarts was lived under the weight of secrets and orchestrated confrontations, each preparing him for the final act in which he would willingly sacrifice himself. The castle was merely the stage for Dumbledore's long preparation, the students, the backdrop, and the chaos, the necessary atmosphere to train a child into a martyr. The corridors of Hogwarts during these years became echo chambers of fear. From Sirius Black breaking into the castle in Harry's 3rd year to the Dementors patrolling the grounds, the supposed bastion of magical education was constantly under siege. Dumbledore's strategy appeared less like oversight and more like deliberate exposure. By normalizing terror, he taught the students to endure it, even to fight against it, but at what cost? Neville Longbottom, who began his schooling timid and clumsy, became courageous through these trials, yet it is worth asking, did he need to grow up in the shadow of death to achieve this strength? Did Ginny Weasley need to suffer possession by Tom Riddle's diary to emerge as a resilient fighter? Growth through trauma is a cruel educational philosophy. There is a line in the Philosopher's Stone when Dumbledore tells Harry it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live. It is a wise statement, but one can also see in it the echo of Dumbledore's own life philosophy, to accept the harshness of reality as the true teacher. Yet if reality is filled with trolls, basilisks, dark wizards, and political corruption, then one must ask who allowed that reality to exist within the school's walls. The constant theme across 7 years is that Hogwarts under Dumbledore was never truly safe. Even in peacetime, it was a place of orchestrated danger, as though safety itself was an illusion that would weaken the children. Many have argued that Dumbledore simply trusted his students, that he believed in their ability to rise above challenges, but trust without protection is neglect. Harry was trusted to face Voldemort repeatedly, to duel with him as a child, to fight Death Eaters in the Department of Mysteries, and to ultimately walk into the Forbidden Forest to die. Each of these moments carried Dumbledore's silent approval. It was not guidance, it was grooming for sacrifice. The other children were collateral damage, learning by proximity to Harry's fate. "You are protected, in short, by your ability to love," Dumbledore told Harry, but that platitude offered no shield against the many crises he could have prevented. The staff themselves often reflected this uneasy climate. Minerva McGonagall voiced concern many times, protesting the dangers faced by students. Severus Snape, though cruel, consistently worked to shield Harry when it truly mattered, acting in shadows where Dumbledore only planned. The contrast is telling. The man presented as benevolent permitted chaos to unfold. Those painted as harsh or ambiguous often acted decisively to prevent catastrophe. It is as though Dumbledore saw the entire chessboard of Hogwarts life and willingly let pawns be sacrificed to prepare his king for checkmate against Voldemort. It is important to recall how students perceived their headmaster. Many adored him, even revered him, as the only figure strong enough to stand against Voldemort. Yet admiration should not blind us to the costs. Fred Weasley would later die in battle. Cedric Diggory perished during a tournament held under Dumbledore's watch. Countless unnamed students lived years of fear rather than years of simple study. Hogwarts, instead of being a sanctuary, became a training ground for soldiers. The laughter in the Great Hall, the joy of Quidditch, the camaraderie of houses all existed, but always against the backdrop of threats that the headmaster seemed to accept as inevitable, if not useful. In examining these moments, one realizes Dumbledore's brilliance was matched by a ruthless pragmatism. He knew that Voldemort could only be defeated by someone prepared to endure extraordinary trials, someone willing to embrace death. The castle itself became the furnace in which this hero was forged. Yet what editor of any serious chronicle can ignore the ethics of such a plan? To raise children in chaos to prepare one child for sacrifice is not the act of a benign guardian. It is the calculation of a general willing to accept casualties for victory. Hogwarts under Dumbledore was not a school of magic alone. It was a battlefield disguised as an education. The legacy of Dumbledore, then, is not merely wisdom and bravery. It is also the acceptance of chaos as a pedagogical tool. He allowed threats to flourish, enemies to lurk, and children to face terrors beyond their years, all because it served the end of defeating Voldemort. Perhaps the world is safer now because of it, but those who lived through those years will always remember that their childhood was not a sanctuary. It was an experiment, and at the center of it stood Albus Dumbledore, calm and enigmatic, watching as danger tested every soul under his charge. Number 22. Not preventing Peter Pettigrew's betrayal. Under the shadow of Godric's Hollow, the fateful decision of who would become secret keeper for James and Lily Potter stands as one of the darkest turning points in the saga. Albus Dumbledore, a man of unmatched intellect and foresight, stood at the heart of the Order of the Phoenix and orchestrated countless strategies to resist Voldemort. Yet when it came to the life of a young family whose fate was tied to a prophecy, his hand seemed curiously restrained. James trusted Sirius Black with his life. Their bond had been forged in fire and laughter at Hogwarts, tested on the battlefields of the First Wizarding War. Still the Potters switched their protection from Sirius to Peter Pettigrew, the weakest of their circle, the one even their classmates barely noticed. This choice, so disastrous in hindsight, begs the question, why did Dumbledore, who understood the mechanics of loyalty and betrayal better than anyone, not intervene? The prophecy given by Sybil Trelawney, half heard by Severus Snape, and reported to Voldemort was no trivial riddle. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. It tied Harry's existence directly to the destiny of the wizarding world. Dumbledore, as keeper of the prophecy, knew its weight. He also knew that Voldemort would act swiftly to prevent it from unfolding. If the Dark Lord was moving against the Potters, then every choice in their defense mattered. Yet when James and Lily made Pettigrew their secret keeper, Dumbledore accepted it without objection. A man of his cunning could have foreseen the cracks in Peter's courage. He could have recognized the imbalance in that group of friends where loyalty masked weakness. The failure to insist on Sirius or to propose himself as the secret keeper feels less like oversight and more like design. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Sirius recalls with bitterness the fatal miscalculation. Lily and James only made me their secret keeper because I suggested it. I thought it would be too obvious if it was me. Peter was the perfect decoy. Sirius's words reveal the twisted irony of the decision. Sirius himself thought he was being clever, and Dumbledore, master of subtlety, allowed it. Did he not consider that Voldemort, with his skill in manipulation, would find his way to the weakest heart? Peter Pettigrew was not only cowardly, but already drifting toward the shadows. Dumbledore, who read people with surgical precision, had to have seen that. His silence at that moment was louder than any order he gave in the war. There is something chilling about how Dumbledore moved like a chess master, often allowing pieces to fall if their sacrifice would serve the greater game. His later admissions about Harry himself, how he raised him to die at the right moment, shed a cold light backward onto this earlier tragedy. Allowing Pettigrew to hold the secret seems to echo the same philosophy, the belief that events must unfold toward an inevitable climax, no matter how many lives were shattered along the way. James and Lily's deaths created the boy who lived. Harry's survival set into motion the narrative that rallied the wizarding world against Voldemort. Could it be that Dumbledore accepted their deaths as the terrible but necessary cost of fulfilling prophecy? One cannot ignore the pattern. Dumbledore admitted in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix that he often left Harry in the dark, guiding events with an invisible hand. I cared about you too much. I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth. These words reveal his habit of choosing what to withhold, letting others stumble into pain for what he considered the greater good. If he could withhold the truth from Harry for years, why should he not also have withheld action at the moment of the Fidelius charm? Perhaps he believed that if Voldemort marked Harry, the chain of events toward the Dark Lord's downfall would begin. To interfere might have broken the fragile web he saw forming. Of course, defenders of Dumbledore might argue that he could not dictate the Potter's choice. The Fidelius charm was rooted in personal trust, and only James and Lily could decide their secret keeper. Yet the influence of Dumbledore in those days was immense. His word carried weight greater than any other wizard in the Order. He was not simply a passive observer, but the leader who set strategies and kept records. If he had told James, "Do not use Pettigrew, he is not strong enough," James would have listened. The fact that he said nothing, that he let the matter pass in silence, becomes suspicious. He knew the stakes were cosmic, and yet he allowed ordinary human affection to dictate one of the most important security decisions in the war. Peter Pettigrew's betrayal is well documented. He revealed the Potter's hiding place to Voldemort, who arrived in Godric's Hollow on that Halloween night. James was killed almost instantly, Lily moments later. Only Harry remained, his scar a permanent reminder of that night. But here lies the haunting detail. Dumbledore seemed prepared. When Hagrid brought Harry to Privet Drive, Dumbledore was waiting. He had already decided to place the boy with the Dursleys, despite their cruelty. He had the plan laid out as though he expected Harry to arrive orphaned. Could it be that in his deepest calculations Dumbledore had anticipated the betrayal and allowed it to happen because it was the path to shaping Harry into the weapon against Voldemort? There is a dark elegance in the idea. The Potters' deaths isolated Harry from the wizarding world, planting him in obscurity until he could rise at the right moment. Without their sacrifice, Harry might have grown into an ordinary child, too protected, too loved to become the kind of resilient figure destiny required. Dumbledore, with his ruthless sense of timing, may have believed this. He had already learned the price of too much power when his sister Ariana died in the crossfire of his youthful ambitions. To him, personal tragedy seemed to birth necessary strength. He might have seen the Potters' deaths as the seedbed for the saviour the prophecy demanded. And yet the human cost cannot be dismissed. Remus Lupin was left broken, Sirius Black was condemned to Azkaban, and Harry endured a decade of abuse. If Dumbledore orchestrated this, it was not strategy alone, but cruelty masked as wisdom. Could he not have preserved both the prophecy and the Potters' lives? Could he not have insisted on Sirius or another strong secret keeper while still allowing Voldemort to target the boy? The silence of Dumbledore in that fateful week echoes like guilt. His refusal to intervene feels like the hand of a man who believed too much in destiny and too little in mercy. When Harry later learns the truth about how much Dumbledore withheld, he is shaken. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the revelation of Dumbledore's past with Grindelwald paints him in a different light. "You cannot despise me more than I despise myself," he confesses. He admits to ambition, to having once seen others as tools for a grand vision. It is hard not to see the shadow of that same ambition in his failure to stop Pettigrew's treachery. If he once dreamed of ruling for the greater good, later he manipulated events for what he believed was the survival of the world. Different aims, perhaps, but the same cold detachment toward human suffering. It is worth recalling how little Dumbledore ever said of Peter Pettigrew. In all the years after, he never expressed shock at his betrayal, only acknowledgement. The absence of surprise suggests he had always known Peter's weakness. Sirius and Remus were devastated, yet Dumbledore received the news with quiet composure. If he had truly been blindsided, would he not have raged? Would he not have admitted to miscalculation? Instead, he folded the event into his larger tapestry as though it had always been woven into the plan. This calm acceptance is perhaps the most damning evidence of all. The betrayal of Peter Pettigrew remains a scar not only on Harry's past, but on the legacy of Dumbledore himself. To some, it was a mistake, born of overconfidence. To others, it was deliberate negligence, a choice to let tragedy unfold so that prophecy could bloom. James and Lily might have lived. Harry might have had a family. Sirius might have been free. But those futures were discarded in favor of the one path Dumbledore chose not to block. The greatest strategist of the age watched the chessboard and allowed his pawns to fall, so that one day the king could be toppled. The story, told in hindsight, becomes a moral riddle. Was Dumbledore wise, seeing farther than others could? Or was he cruel, bending lives to his will? The unanswered questions hang in the margins of the narrative. Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living, and above all, those who live without love. Those were Dumbledore's words in the final battle. Yet what pity did he show the Potters when they placed their trust in a man too weak to carry it? Perhaps the real tragedy is not that Peter betrayed them, but that the one man who could have stopped it chose not to. Number 23. Abandoning Neville Longbottom's potential fate. Albus Dumbledore was often seen as the guiding hand of destiny within the wizarding world, a figure of wisdom who shaped events with subtle but powerful decisions. Yet the moment that exposes the dangerous edge of his long game is hidden within the prophecy spoken by Sybil Trelawney, the prophecy that could have applied not only to Harry Potter but equally to Neville Longbottom. It stated that the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. Both Harry and Neville met those conditions, and the choice of Voldemort to mark Harry sealed his fate. But the chilling truth is that Dumbledore already knew both boys were potential bearers of that destiny. Instead of preparing them equally, he placed the weight of the world on Harry's shoulders, leaving Neville to stumble in shadows, unprepared and unsupported, while secretly knowing how close he had been to the same horrific destiny. Neville Longbottom was the only son of Frank and Alice Longbottom, both Aurors who had fought bravely against Voldemort during the First Wizarding War. Like James and Lily Potter, they too had thrice defied the Dark Lord. The tragic irony was that Neville's parents suffered a fate just as cruel as Harry's. Tortured to madness by Bellatrix Lestrange and her allies, they lived permanently in St. Mungo's Hospital, unrecognizing their son visiting them with sweets they could not even acknowledge. Dumbledore was fully aware of this torment. He saw the fragile boy growing up with a domineering grandmother, constantly reminded of what he was not, all the while carrying the potential weight of prophecy. Yet he did nothing to guide Neville toward understanding that he too might have been the chosen one. In failing to support Neville, Dumbledore left him alone in the margins of the story, condemned to a life where the shadow of destiny pressed heavily without the honor of acknowledgement. The effects of this neglect are seen vividly in Neville's early years at Hogwarts. He was clumsy, forgetful, and the frequent target of ridicule from classmates like Draco Malfoy, or even disdain from professors such as Severus Snape. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he forgets the Gryffindor common room password so often that Hermione has to remind him. His timid nature makes him freeze under pressure, and yet in one rare burst of courage he stands against Harry, Ron, and Hermione, prompting Dumbledore to say, "It takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends." The headmaster rewarded him with 10 points that won Gryffindor the House Cup. But was this a token gesture meant to encourage a boy already neglected? Dumbledore knew more about Neville's potential role than he let on, and yet he allowed the boy to remain weak and uncertain, as if deliberately narrowing the path toward one chosen child. The cruelty of fate lies in Voldemort's choice. The Dark Lord interpreted the prophecy and, in his paranoia, decided the child who posed a threat must be Harry Potter. He struck at Godric's Hollow, killing James and Lily and marking Harry as his equal. But had he chosen differently, had he turned his wand on the Longbottom's son, then Neville would have grown up as the boy who lived. Unlike Harry, Neville did not have the love of parents to shield him with sacrificial magic. The likely outcome would have been tragic. Bellatrix Lestrange's obsession with the Longbottoms suggests she would have finishing what Voldemort began. And Dumbledore knew this. By not fortifying Neville, by not balancing the scales of preparation, the headmaster gambled recklessly with the lives of 2 boys, choosing to place his faith entirely in Harry while leaving Neville to languish in self-doubt. The evidence of this favoritism is visible throughout the series. Harry is mentored personally by Dumbledore, receiving private lessons in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince about Horcruxes and Voldemort's past. He is given the invisibility cloak, special knowledge, and constant protection. Neville, by contrast, receives no such guidance. His victories are accidental or arise from sheer determination rather than preparation. Consider the battle with the Boggart in Harry Potter and the Yule prisoner of Azkaban. Remus Lupin steps in to help Neville, face his fear of Snape by teaching him the ridiculous spell. This moment strengthens Neville, but it comes from Lupin, not from Dumbledore. The headmaster, who knew how fragile the boy's confidence was, remained distant. Why would he not take steps to nurture the boy who might have been as crucial as Harry? Was it blindness, or was it deliberate choice? One cannot ignore the possibility that Dumbledore consciously limited Neville's involvement because he feared dividing the focus of resistance. To train two possible chosen ones could have split resources and sowed confusion. Harry, with his fame, already commanded attention. Neville, awkward and insecure, might have distracted or complicated the narrative. Dumbledore, ever the strategist, may have decided it was easier to bet on one player, to concentrate all of the Order's energy on Harry Potter. This cold calculation would fit his character. He was, after all, the man who admitted in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows that he cared more for the greater good in his youth, and at times that ruthless pragmatism still coloured his choices. If sacrificing Neville's potential meant sharpening Harry's destiny, then perhaps Dumbledore accepted the cruelty as necessary. And yet this neglect inflicted profound scars on Neville's life. Constantly compared to Harry, he grew up believing himself inadequate, never quite measuring up to the boy who carried the prophecy. The Sorting Hat nearly placed him in Hufflepuff, so lacking was his own sense of courage, though deep within he possessed the heart of a true Gryffindor. His wand troubles, stemming from inheriting his father's wand rather than one chosen by him, further deepened his insecurities. Each failure reinforced the narrative that he was unworthy. In truth, had Dumbledore nurtured him, had he provided encouragement instead of distance, Neville might have grown into his role much earlier, standing as an equal to Harry rather than a shadow behind him. The turning point for Neville came not through Dumbledore's guidance, but through his own acts of resistance. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, he joins Dumbledore's army, training in secret under Harry's leadership. It is telling that Neville's growth comes not from the headmaster but from peers who believe in him. In the climactic battle at the Department of Mysteries, he fights alongside Harry, Hermione, Ron, Luna, and Ginny. Though injured and nearly incapacitated, he refuses to abandon the fight, clinging desperately to the prophecy orb until it shatters. The moment illustrates that he was always capable of great courage, if only someone had believed in him sooner. But Dumbledore, who knew of the prophecy, who knew Neville's potential, remained silent, letting the boy fight his way to self-worth through pain and struggle. By the time of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Neville remains largely sidelined, overshadowed by Harry's direct tutelage under Dumbledore. Yet the boy's resilience continues to build, and when the final battle arrives in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, it is Neville who delivers one of the most decisive blows. When Voldemort calls for surrender and mocks the resistance, Neville steps forward, declaring with defiance, "I'll join you when hell freezes over. Dumbledore's army." In that moment, he embodies the very spirit of resistance, wielding Gryffindor's sword to slay Nagini, the final Horcrux. The irony is staggering. The boy, once dismissed, neglected, and overshadowed, becomes the one who ensures Voldemort's ultimate defeat. And yet, this triumph is Neville's achievement alone, born of his own growth, not Dumbledore's design. If one retraces the narrative, it becomes clear that Dumbledore's neglect of Neville was not an accident. His every choice revealed calculation. He praised Neville occasionally, rewarded him lightly, but never pulled him into the inner circle. Even after the prophecy was revealed to Harry, Dumbledore made no effort to confide in Neville, though the boy had equal claim to its words. He allowed him to live with the unspoken truth that he was almost the chosen one, but not quite. This silence served Dumbledore's plan, streamlining the path for Harry, but it denied Neville recognition of his own strength until the very end. Such manipulation reveals the darker side of Dumbledore's brilliance, a man who understood the stakes of destiny but was willing to gamble with lives to secure victory. The human cost of this decision is profound. Neville grew up in a constant state of quiet suffering, shaped by the absence of parents, the burden of expectation from his grandmother, and the lack of affirmation from those in power. His courage emerged not because of Dumbledore, but despite him. He represents the countless overlooked, those who could have been heroes, but were left to wander without guidance. The fact that Neville ultimately rose to greatness only highlights how much more he might have achieved had the headmaster chosen to nurture him from the beginning. Dumbledore's wisdom is often praised, but here it reveals a dangerous arrogance, the belief that he alone could decide which lives to elevate and which to leave in the shadows. In this light, one must question whether Dumbledore went too far in his manipulation of destiny. To gamble between two boys, to place his faith entirely in one while consigning the other to neglect, is a chilling reflection of his readiness to shape events through control. He was right that Harry would ultimately face Voldemort, but wrong to assume that Neville's path did not matter. For when the final moment came, it was Neville's sword, Neville's defiance, that turned the tide. Perhaps the prophecy was never about one boy, but about the courage that emerges in unexpected places. By overlooking Neville, Dumbledore nearly denied the world the hero who struck the final blow. The story of Neville Longbottom exposes the uncomfortable truth about Albus Dumbledore's methods. He was a man capable of immense compassion, yet also of ruthless calculation. He admitted to Harry that he had kept secrets, confessing, "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth, more for your peace of mind than my plan, more for your life than my own." But this confession was to Harry alone. To Neville, there were no words, no acknowledgement of how close he came to bearing the same destiny. In leaving him unprepared, Dumbledore showed not mercy but a dangerous overreach. His choice to favour one boy and abandon the other is perhaps the clearest moment when the headmaster's plans went too far, revealing the peril of a who sought to orchestrate fate itself. Number 24, never truly helping Draco Malfoy. In the 6th book, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the shadow of Voldemort stretches across every page, and one of its darkest effects falls not on Harry, but on Draco Malfoy. A 16-year-old boy raised in privilege but not prepared for true evil suddenly finds himself tasked with an impossible mission, to murder Albus Dumbledore. The cruelty of Voldemort's plan is obvious, yet the silent role played by Dumbledore himself is just as unsettling. While he understood Draco's situation in its entirety, while he watched closely and even admitted to knowing what was happening, he chose not to intervene in any meaningful way. This silence, this decision to let the boy walk deeper into the abyss, marks one of the rare but chilling moments when Dumbledore's grand strategies went too far. Draco's assignment was not a matter of schoolboy mischief or some minor scheme of Slytherin cunning. Voldemort did not simply order him to frighten Harry or cause trouble in class, he demanded blood. Draco, a teenager known more for arrogance and petty cruelty than real violence, was suddenly told that his family's survival depended on his ability to kill the greatest wizard of the age. It was a test of loyalty, but also a death sentence in disguise. Narcissa Malfoy's desperation, when she visited Severus Snape with Bellatrix and begged for protection, made it clear how impossible the task was. Draco was marked not as an assassin, but as a scapegoat, meant to fail and die. And Dumbledore knew all of this. He confided to Harry that Voldemort was giving Draco a mission that was intended to end in death. The book makes it unmistakable that Dumbledore was fully aware of Draco's plight. His calm conversation with Harry on the astronomy tower included the words, "I do not think Draco intends to kill me. He cannot." This admission reveals that Dumbledore did not see Draco as a true danger, but rather as a pawn being pushed toward collapse. If he recognized that Draco's hands were never meant to carry this burden, why then did he allow the game to continue? Why watch a boy grow thinner, paler, and more haunted with every passing week without extending a hand to truly lift him out of the trap? It is here that Dumbledore's reputation for wisdom becomes a double-edged sword. Throughout the school year, Draco was unraveling. His absence from Quidditch, his secretive comings and goings, and his increasingly nervous demeanour were all signals that any attentive adult could have interpreted as signs of distress. Even Harry noticed, despite his long-standing rivalry with Draco. He followed him, confronted him, and obsessed over the truth. If Harry, clouded by hatred, could sense the desperation, how much more could Dumbledore, the man who claimed to understand human nature above all else? And yet the headmaster's solution was not to intervene, but to watch from a distance. He admitted later that he had known all along, and had even instructed Snape to watch Draco carefully. But this was protection from Voldemort's punishment, not mercy for Draco himself. The irony lies in the fact that Dumbledore, who spoke so often about compassion, never spared Draco the simplest act of it, telling him the truth. He could have reassured the boy that he would not be left alone, that Voldemort's trap was known and countered, that other choices existed. Instead, Draco carried the unbearable weight of believing that his family's survival depended entirely on his own crime. He was not only living with fear of death, but also with guilt before the crime was even committed. He became the embodiment of Voldemort's cruelty and Dumbledore's silence. When the fateful night arrived, the scene in the astronomy tower revealed the truth in its rawest form. Draco burst into the tower, his wand shaking, his voice cracking. The boy was trembling, cornered, and drowning in fear. His words to Dumbledore were revealing. "I've got to do it. He'll kill me. He'll kill my whole family." There is nothing in those sentences that speaks of hate or choice. They speak only of coercion. In that moment, Dumbledore showed kindness, telling him that he was not a killer and that there were other ways. But this tenderness came at the last possible second, after an entire year of torment had already etched itself into Draco's face. Why did Dumbledore wait until the wand was raised, until the fear was at its peak? The decision to let Draco reach that point was not negligence, it was strategy. Dumbledore had already planned his own death with Snape. He was dying from the cursed ring and knew his time was short. Allowing Voldemort's plan to unfold meant using Draco as a piece in a larger chess game, drawing out the Death Eaters and ensuring Snape's loyalty in Voldemort's eyes. In that calculation, Draco's suffering became part of the price. It was not about saving Draco, but about defeating Voldemort. This is the harsh truth of the headmaster's choices. He valued the end of the war above the rescue of one frightened child. This cold logic reveals the shadowed side of Dumbledore's leadership. His faith in the greater good often demanded sacrifices that others had to bear. In Draco's case, the sacrifice was innocence. A boy's adolescence was stolen not just by Voldemort's cruelty, but by Dumbledore's willingness to let the cruelty run its course. The weight of attempted murder, of nearly becoming a killer, would haunt Draco long after the war. Even if he never cast the curse, the memory of that night and the knowledge of what he had been forced to try would never leave him. It is worth remembering how Dumbledore treated Harry in similar circumstances. He guided, he warned, he explained. Even when he kept secrets from Harry, he eventually revealed the truth in private conversations, offering direction. With Draco, however, there was no such guidance, no midnight meeting in the headmaster's office, no whispered advice about choices and courage. Draco was left to drown, while Dumbledore stood on the shore and took notes. It is a contrast that should disturb any reader who praises Dumbledore's wisdom without question. Snape's involvement makes this even more complex. By taking the unbreakable vow, he promised Narcissa to protect Draco. Yet what was protection in this sense? It was not saving Draco from the burden, but ensuring he survived the night when Dumbledore's life ended. It was survival, not relief. The boy still suffered every day until that night. He was still a child being used as a pawn by every adult around him. Voldemort, his parents, Snape, and even Dumbledore. In the end, all of them were willing to let him carry the impossible weight for their own reasons. When readers look back at Draco's journey, it is impossible not to see the physical and emotional deterioration he underwent. J.K. Rowling describes him as looking sickly and thinner than ever, and later as a boy who could barely lift his wand. These are not the descriptions of a villain in control of his fate. They are the marks of someone breaking under pressure. The tragedy is that he had no choice, and the adults around him allowed it. Dumbledore's belated comfort came only in whispers before death, too little and too late to erase what had already been done. This moment forces a question that haunts Dumbledore's legacy. Was he truly the protector of students, or was he a general willing to sacrifice them for victory? The image of a trembling Draco in the tower, wand shaking before the most powerful wizard in the school, does not paint a picture of guidance or mentorship. It paints a picture of a boy abandoned to play his role in a war he did not start. The saddest part is that Draco never asked for this. Unlike Harry, who chose to fight, Draco was drafted into Voldemort's game by the sins of his parents. He was punished for Lucius's failures, trapped by Narcissus' fear, and judged by the world as a willing Death Eater. Yet, inside the tower, we see the truth. He was only a child who wanted to save his family. Dumbledore could have freed him from that narrative, could have intervened to show him another way. He chose not to. Years later, in The Cursed Child, we see Draco as a man still marked by his past, still haunted by the shadows of what he once was forced to become. His bitterness and isolation are not only the legacy of Voldemort's war, but also of the adults who allowed him to bear more than any child should. Dumbledore, for all his brilliance, left Draco to face that weight alone. It was the moment when the headmaster, so often praised as the champion of the young, let one of them slip too far into the darkness, not because he had no choice, but because he chose to let the plan run its course. Number 25. Ignoring the fake Mad-Eye Moody. Albus Dumbledore's legacy in the wizarding world is filled with brilliance, sacrifice, and a unique vision of the greater good. Yet even the greatest minds stumble, and there is one particular event during the Triwizard tournament that continues to stir unease among those who look back at his choices. For an entire year, he failed to see what was directly under his nose. Alastor Mad-Eye Moody was not Moody at all, but Barty Crouch Jr., a Death Eater in disguise. The very idea that the most perceptive wizard of his age did not uncover such a deception immediately raises questions that cut to the heart of Dumbledore's methods. Did he truly miss it, or did he choose to let events play out? Consequences of that year suggest a far more troubling possibility, that Dumbledore, in his obsession with the bigger picture, was willing to ignore even the danger within his own castle. When one recalls Moody's arrival at Hogwarts, it is difficult not to notice how seamlessly he stepped into the role. He terrified students with lessons on the unforgivable curses, he barked in his grizzled tone about constant vigilance, and he presented himself exactly as the real Auror had been described. Harry, Ron, and Hermione accepted him without hesitation, and so did the rest of the school. The problem, however, is that Albus Dumbledore had known the real Moody for decades. The old Auror was not simply a colleague, but a trusted ally from the wars against Voldemort. Moody's paranoia was legendary, his temper sharp, his mannerisms unmistakable. Could Dumbledore truly not see that something was amiss? Moody never trusted anyone, and yet Dumbledore placed his faith in this impostor without a shadow of doubt. This contradiction feels less like oversight and more like deliberate neglect. The Triwizard tournament was a stage of manipulation, not just by Voldemort, but perhaps also by Dumbledore himself. From the moment Harry's name was drawn from the Goblet of Fire, suspicion should have fallen on the machinery surrounding the contest. Dumbledore's calm response, his insistence that Harry must compete, and his measured detachment from the boy's obvious fear suggested something chilling. He did not fight the unfairness, but accepted it as though it fit neatly into a plan he had already considered. And there stood Moody, offering help at critical moments, pointing Harry toward the dragons, advising him about the gillyweed, guiding him step by step to victory. Every clue placed Harry closer to Voldemort's resurrection. If Dumbledore had truly been blind to the impostor, then his blindness endangered not only Harry, but the entire magical world. The way Barty Crouch Jr. maintained his cover is explained in the book. He drank Polyjuice potion out of his hip flask every hour, disguised as Alastair Moody. But even Polyjuice cannot mimic everything perfectly. There are instincts, reflexes, personal quirks that cannot be bottled in a potion. The real Moody's magical eye, for example, moved with unpredictable swiftness, catching everything. It was part of his reputation. And yet no moment arises in the story where Dumbledore questions the authenticity of that eye, no flicker of doubt crosses his words. When Barty Crouch Jr. is finally revealed, Harry recalls with horror how easily he had been fooled. But the larger question remains, why was Dumbledore fooled? Or perhaps he was never fooled at all. Perhaps he needed Harry to face Voldemort again, no matter the price. There is a telling moment near the climax after Harry's return from the graveyard, when Dumbledore listens with extraordinary calm to the boy's account of Voldemort's resurrection. His first words are not shock, but resolution. "We have been expecting this." This suggests that Dumbledore anticipated Harry would eventually meet Voldemort face to face. If that was his expectation, then allowing Crouch Jr. to act unhindered as Moody provided the perfect mechanism. A loyal Death Eater disguised as a teacher ensured that Harry would be maneuvered directly into the path of the Dark Lord. It is a chilling line of reasoning, but it explains why Dumbledore never questioned the impostor, because the impostor's presence served his long-term design. To understand the weight of this decision, one must consider Dumbledore's philosophy. He had long believed in what he once confessed to Harry. "We must try not to sink beneath our anguish, Harry, but battle on." His battle had always been strategic, a long game against Voldemort's return. Sacrifices were necessary, and Harry himself was no stranger to being positioned like a chess piece. From the protection of the blood charm to the withholding of prophecy details, Dumbledore consistently chose secrecy and manipulation over transparency. Allowing Harry to be guided by a Death Eater may have been the most dangerous move of all, but within Dumbledore's framework, it was a move that forced destiny to accelerate. Still, there is undeniable recklessness in leaving Hogwarts exposed. The impostor taught classes on dark curses, demonstrated the Cruciatus curse on a spider in front of horrified children, and planted within them the seed of terror. This was tolerated in the name of education, but would the real Moody have gone so far in such a theatrical fashion? Hermione's reaction captures the unease. "Isn't that illegal? To use those spells in front of us?" It was more than unusual, it was radical, and yet Dumbledore allowed it. Perhaps he saw value in preparing the children for the darkness to come, but more likely, he simply allowed Crouch Jr. to operate unchecked because he knew the boy's true allegiance. When Barty Crouch Jr. is finally unmasked, the revelation hits with devastating clarity. The scarred, wild-looking face was suddenly smooth, pale, and young. The false eye popped out. For Harry and the others, it was a shocking twist. For Dumbledore, however, his reaction was not surprise, but grim confirmation. He seemed to absorb the truth instantly, without disbelief. One could almost argue that he had suspected it all along, but had chosen silence. If so, then his gamble was one of extraordinary arrogance, risking the lives of countless students for the sake of maneuvering Harry into direct confrontation with Voldemort. The ethical question is inescapable. Was it justifiable for Dumbledore to risk a year's worth of children's safety for the greater plan? Neville Longbottom, Cedric Diggory, Hermione Granger, all of them lived under the shadow of a Death Eater disguised as their protector. Cedric's death in particular becomes the haunting reminder of this gamble. "Kill the spare," Voldemort ordered, and Cedric fell. Had Dumbledore intervened earlier, had he investigated the inconsistencies in Moody's behavior, perhaps Cedric might have survived. In this light, Dumbledore's choice looks less like wisdom and more like neglect, wrapped in strategic justification. There is also the matter of trust. Dumbledore trusted very few people fully: Minerva McGonagall, Severus Snape, perhaps Hagrid. But he placed complete trust in Moody, a man whose very identity had been consumed by another. Was this trust the result of overconfidence, or was it staged? Dumbledore's reputation often allowed him to cloak errors in the guise of foresight. To the world, his choices seemed infallible, but here the consequences were undeniable. The school had been infiltrated by one of Voldemort's most loyal followers, and Dumbledore had done nothing until the very end. Some argue that Dumbledore was overextended, that with the Ministry's interference, the chaos of the tournament, and the looming threat of Voldemort, his attention was divided. This excuse falters when one considers who Dumbledore was. He was the man who could sense the existence of Horcruxes, who could duel Grindelwald and win, who could manipulate the Ministry itself when needed. To believe that he could not recognize a Polyjuice disguise for an entire year strains credibility. More plausible is the idea that he saw it, sensed it, and chose to allow it, believing that destiny required Harry's confrontation with Voldemort sooner rather than later. The pattern repeats itself throughout Harry's life. In his first year, Dumbledore left him to face Professor Quirrell, alone at the Mirror of Erised. In his second, he allowed Harry to venture into the Chamber of Secrets. By the third, he stood back while Harry confronted Dementors and a supposed mass murderer. Each year presented Harry with trials that could have killed him, and each time Dumbledore allowed them, citing faith in the boy's strength. The Triwizard Tournament was merely the most elaborate and dangerous of these orchestrations, with the impostor Moody acting as the guiding hand of fate. Looking back, one cannot escape the sense that Dumbledore had, in some way, sacrificed Alastor Moody as well. The real Auror spent the year locked in a magical trunk, stripped of freedom, while his identity was used for manipulation. Dumbledore, who had fought side by side with Moody, did not sense his absence. Did he not notice that his friend's voice, his edge, his habits were subtly altered? Perhaps he noticed, but said nothing, because Moody's disappearance suited the grander scheme. If so, it marks one of the darkest compromises in Dumbledore's long and complicated career. The story of Barty Crouch Jr. as Moody is not simply the tale of one Death Eater's cunning disguise. It is the story of how Albus Dumbledore allowed his vision of the greater good to cloud his immediate responsibilities. Whether through arrogance, calculation, or a combination of both, he ignored the signs that even a cautious observer might have caught. In doing so, he placed Harry on a collision course with Voldemort, sacrificed the life of Cedric Diggory, and allowed a Death Eater to educate a generation of students. The Triwizard Tournament revealed not just the return of the Dark Lord, but also the unsettling truth that Dumbledore, in his pursuit of victory, sometimes walked dangerously close to failure. Number 26, allowing monsters and deadly dangers at Hogwarts. Hogwarts, a place that was supposed to embody safety and protection, often resembled something closer to a battleground for survival. Albus Dumbledore, the wise and enigmatic headmaster, presented himself as the protector of young witches and wizards, yet time and again the school under his watch was filled with creatures and traps that could have easily ended lives. One of the most glaring examples was the infamous Whomping Willow, a tree whose very nature was violence. It struck with lethal force at anyone who came too close. It was not tucked away in some forbidden corner. It stood proudly on the school grounds, visible to students. The presence of such a hazard was a choice, not an accident. Dumbledore knew about it, approved of it, and left it unguarded. When Harry first encountered it in The Prisoner of Azkaban, the narrative showed the absurdity of the situation. A 14-year-old boy nearly crushed simply because he was within reach. The tree was attacking them. Its branches were hammering and tearing at the car, which was trapped tight in its clutches. That image alone reveals the absurd risk, a magical school where even the landscape might kill you. But the Whomping Willow was only the beginning. Consider the fact that Dumbledore allowed a basilisk, an ancient monster capable of killing with a glance, to slither freely through the castle pipes for decades. When Harry encountered it in the Chamber of Secrets, the school was already on the verge of catastrophe. Several students were petrified, and only luck prevented full fatalities. The sheer recklessness of allowing a creature of that magnitude to remain beneath the castle raises questions. Tom Riddle may have unleashed it, but it was Dumbledore who presided over a school where the chamber could exist unchecked. It is impossible to ignore how the monster remained hidden for 50 years after Myrtle's death, and Dumbledore, supposedly the greatest wizard of his age, did not resolve the threat. Instead, children were left wandering hallways where death itself lay in the walls. The chilling quote, "Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever," reminds us how easily it could have ended differently for Ginny Weasley. The risk was not abstract, it nearly cost lives of the youngest students. Then there was Aragog, the colossal acromantula raised by Hagrid and allowed to spawn an entire colony in the Forbidden Forest. An acromantula is classified by the Ministry of Magic as a creature too dangerous to be bred or domesticated, and yet one of their lairs thrived only a short distance from the school. When Harry and Ron entered that nest, the scene was nightmarish. The creatures closed in fast, clicking their pincers menacingly all around them. It was only the intervention of the flying car that saved them. Yet these monsters were tolerated within reach of students. What lesson could possibly justify exposing children to a forest full of predators? For Dumbledore, perhaps this was another exercise in courage, but to any parent reading the Daily Prophet, it was simply madness. Equally alarming was the school's decision to allow a mountain troll inside during the first year. Although the creature was brought in by Quirrell as part of his deception, it underscores how permeable Hogwarts was to danger. The troll that nearly killed Hermione in the bathroom was not stopped by professors, but by 11-year-olds improvising spells. With what sounded like a roar of triumph, Harry threw himself onto the troll's back and seized the troll around the neck. Such an image should horrify us. What sort of headmaster allows circumstances where a child must cling to the back of a raging troll with no adult in sight? It exposes a system where survival relied less on protection and more on raw chance and bravery. The inclusion of Remus Lupin, admirable though he was as a man, raises further ethical dilemmas. Lupin was a werewolf, and despite precautions, the fact remains that a dangerous creature was regularly in contact with children. The wolfsbane potion was a safeguard, yet a single lapse could have been catastrophic. The reality was underlined in The Prisoner of Azkaban when Snape revealed the truth, and even more starkly when Lupin transformed under the moonlight. "A werewolf is among us tonight," Snape snarled, and for once his alarm carried truth. Students were feet away from a rampaging beast. Lupin's qualities as a teacher do not erase the recklessness of placing dozens of young lives in danger every full moon. Again, it was Dumbledore who approved this arrangement.